in a sense, you're the easiest witness to deal with today. In terms of,
that makes a nice change.
Because I think our questions relate to your involvement, which is pretty limited, and it's really the reasons why it was so limited. Give us the explanation as to why, when the police kept writing to the CPS and saying, review what we've done, you were so, or your officials were so very firm in saying, actually, this has got nothing to do with us. This is for you to decide. Tell the committee why that was the case.
We have director's guidance which sets out what the police will do, what the CPS will do, so it's very clear, not just to each of us, but to everybody else, exactly what decisions we all make and what happens. The guidance is clear that cases that come to us for charging decisions should only do so when the police consider that that it satisfies the code test, which is a realistic prospect of conviction. At no time did this meet that test. So the guidance is very clear. It's a decision that the police can make, and they make ordinarily in many cases every day of the year.
Why were they so desperate to get you to back them up in the decisions that they made? Because clearly the guidelines are very clear. As you said, the test was not met. Why do they keep writing to you, do you imagine?
Well, I think you've heard from Mr. Rodhouse why they did that. I can't put myself into their minds. All I know is that they kept asking us, and we were very clear that this did not pass the test. It was not a case that was particularly complex, so it didn't fit the guidance, and therefore it wasn't for us to make the decision. And
in respect to Mr. Watson's letter to you, you were even more clinical. He writes to you, and you just hand on the letter to the police. Which
we do in lots of cases where we get letters from other MPs or indeed members of the public which relate to investigations. It's not a matter for us. I can't answer for the police, so we always pass it straight to the relevant force for them to answer.
Now, you've taken some decisions which have obviously resulted in criticism of the CPS and indeed of yourself. And you've taken it, if I'd say, on the chin. You accept that this is part of the territory of being the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Absolutely.
Have you ever come across any circumstance where a decision taken by the CPS has been based on media criticism or public cynicism?
No.
And what do you feel about those words? Would you ever make a decision on that basis?
No, we make our decisions in accordance with the Code for Crown Prosecutors, and that's the only thing that we make our decisions on. So whether there's realistic prospect of conviction, looking at the evidence, and it's got to be reliable and admissible in court, and whether or not it's in the public interest. If the first one, realistic prospect of conviction, isn't met, we don't even go into the public interest. That doesn't have any.
So you would like to see a change in the law, as Bernard Hogan-Howe suggests, that the guidance should be amended, which would allow you to be giving advice to the Metropolitan Police on what appears to be operational matters?
Well, we don't have to change the law for that because it's the director's guidance. So it's my guidance, albeit that this current guidance was signed off by my predecessor. So I could change the guidance if I thought that was appropriate. What I don't want is for us to become responsible for decisions that are rightly the police's territory. We're not investigators. We don't make operational decisions in relation to investigations. We can advise and we can help, but those decisions are not for us. So I'm very clear about that, and there is no reason in the majority of cases, in a lot of cases, the police will make those decisions.
So you don't want to change the guidance? You don't see any reason why they should be changed?
We, at the moment, and we had a meeting on it yesterday, we are talking to the police about some of these issues and whether or not they're making representations as to why they think we should change the guidance.
Can I just, before I open this up to colleagues, talk about the Paul Gambaccini case? We accept your explanation. We're not happy about your explanation, but we accept it. That for administrative reasons you didn't write to Mr. Gambaccini.
And I'm very sorry for that.
Well, thank you very much for that. Just explain the difference between the file you got in February and the one you got in September, and why did you have to wait for that file?
Well, as I said, we make our decisions in accordance with the code, and that is whether or not there is a realistic prospect of conviction, whether there's sufficient evidence. In order for us to make that decision in many cases, we do need a full file of evidence, which means that all investigative avenues have been pursued, whether they might be exculpatory or whether they might be to prove the offence. We weren't satisfied. Well, I think the first time when we had the file, we were giving what we call early investigative advice, which is not a charging decision. It's about where the investigation is, what other avenues might be pursued, what sort of things we would be looking for in a full charging file. When the file came in, we still didn't have enough, so there was a bit of to and froing to make sure that we got everything we needed in order to make a charging decision.
So if you'd got that in February, you could have made that decision earlier, and Mr. Gambaccini would have been spared 6 months of under the U tree, as he called it.
Yes, I mean, we can't make our decisions until we get a full file of evidence, and we don't make our decisions apart from certain cases where people are in custody and there's an immediate threat.
But you've now written to him?
Yes, I have written to him.
Thank you. Is that in the public domain, that letter?
I haven't put it in the public domain. I have sent my letter directly to him.
Right. We will write to him and get a copy if he's happy with that. David Burrows.
From DCI Settle that on 19th of August 2013 he received advice from Deborah Carr at CBS that concluded, on the evidence I've seen, I'm of the view that there is insufficient evidence to prove that the suspect would have been aware that the victim was not consenting. And then you may well have heard, I'm not sure if you had a chance to hear, his evidence that he couldn't justify a lawful use of police power in terms of cautioning before interview and moving to the point of interview. Was that a sound decision by him?
That's an operational matter for the police, and we're very clear that that's an operational matter for the police. So our advice, which was given at that stage, which was early investigative advice, made it clear that we thought there wasn't sufficient at that stage for a realistic prospect of conviction, and made it clear that any other action was a matter for the police to decide in accordance with PACE and their own regulations.
But from what you've heard, you seem to that was relied upon in terms of not to get to the first hurdle. He didn't get the first hurdle even to interview. Is that unusual for an officer to get to that point in these type of allegations, to the point where they don't actually decide to interview?
I mean, it's difficult to say because it's almost the negative, because those type of cases will never come to us. So no. I should imagine that there are, for the number of reports that go to the police and the number of cases that come to us, there may well be other cases, but I would have no idea as to the number, because they would by definition tend not to come to us.
But the relevance of this, with the letter from Mr Watson, 28th of April to you, it made specific reference to the lack of interview and indeed arrest as well, and also to the guidance, which is CBS and ACPO guidance. Is there anything in that guidance that supports the case that at that stage he should have been interviewed?
I mean, there will always be some cases where the allegation is such right at the beginning that an officer would be able to make a judgment that it's not going to pass, it's not going to get any further, and therefore there is no point in actually going ahead and interviewing anyone. In this particular case, we gave very clear early investigative advice that from the complainant's account herself, we didn't think there was enough on that alone for it to go ahead, and there would not be sufficient evidence for a realistic prospect.
But I struggled in this guidance to find anything that would suggest that there was anything that's done contrary at the moment to the officer's decision not to process it into an interview. There's nothing.
I think it's a matter of judgment. I think so. I don't think there is anything that's contrary to it.
And then,
Stick your finger. Sorry, please continue.
So, you've heard, obviously, looking now on this, what we've heard over the evidence from a number of people, that plainly there's wide difference of opinion in relation to this, ranging from the officer DCI Settle talking about the issue that it was be grossly disproportionate, lacking legal basis to take it further, referred to a baseless witch hunt. That's a serious view put forward. And then you heard the Assistant Commissioner saying he has a different view on it. When you're looking at this and you have guidance that's looking at these serious allegations, do you have any comments?
I mean, I can't comment on their sort of disagreement. What I can say is that we, at the early investigative advice stage, we said that we thought that on the basis of the information we had, which was the complainant's evidence, and some other bits, we did not think there was a realistic prospect of conviction. It did not get any stronger with any further investigation, and that's why we were clear it never met the test for coming to us for charging advice, because there was never a realistic prospect of conviction.
Finally, just Were you aware of any contact from Mr. Watson with your office or any other offices in relation to the Metropolitan Police and those involved in these investigations subsequent to the 28th of April concerning the allegation of Jay?
No, the only contact I was aware of was the letter from Mr. Watson to me. That was the only contact. I wasn't aware of anything else.
Thank you. David Winnick.
Just one or two matters to clarify issues, Ms. Saunders. Do you know Tom Watson in a social sense?
No.
In other words, is he a friend of yours, to put it in blunt?
No, I met him today for the first time as we were sitting here. So that's the first time I've met him.
The first time? Some have said that it's surprising, but in his letter, the 28th of April, he begins, "Dear Alison." Now, I know there's something perhaps strange to my generation in trying to abolish surnames, which I'm not too sympathetic about, but is it surprising that he should address you by your first name?
I should say I'm addressed by many things by many different people, but I'm never surprised at what people address me as.
You can rest assured, should I ever write to you, it won't be "Dear Alison," but your reply is "Dear Mr. Watson."
Yes.
What I want to make it absolute, ask you is that, and perhaps you can make it absolutely clear, was there any intervention, be it by this letter from Mr. Watson or any other source, that influenced your decision in a particular case?
No.
Not at all?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. I should declare my interest. I do write to the DPP and say "Dear Alison" in my letters.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
She has very kindly replied, "Dear Mr. Vaz." Nusrat Ghani.
Oh, thank you. Contradictory evidence this morning from Mr. Settle and the Met Police. And I just want to understand if there are processes in place, whether everybody is aware of them or whether there is some ignorance being played out here.
The processes are very clearly set out around what should come to us for charging advice, what should come to us for early investigative advice.
Everyone that gave evidence this morning should have been made aware, apart from Mr. Watson, should have been made aware of all.
It's very clearly set out, whether people are aware or not. We always have very good policy. Sometimes people are not aware of them, but it's very clear from the director's guidance, which everyone should know, when cases come to us for charging and when they don't.
I'm just concerned that there might have been, within the Met, there might be some institutional blindness, for example, that they've chosen to ignore procedures and just make decisions based on their own judgment.
We certainly made it clear right from the beginning where we thought the line was in this particular case, and we maintained that line.
So you made it clear, but they didn't understand that at all?
Well, they obviously kept asking us to review that, so...
My other concern is that the repercussions of this case to victims who might be deterred from coming forward, that they might feel that they may not be taken seriously, or they need to have a person of power, a man of establishment like Mr. Watson. He would be the only person to deliver them justice. Can you comment on that at all?
I would sincerely hope it does not put anybody off coming forward. If they've been the subject of an offence, an alleged offence, one would hope they would come forward and report that to the police and go through the procedures where they can have support and they can make their allegations, and those allegations can be investigated. And I would certainly encourage anyone to come forward.
And has Mr. Watson's involvement damaged the cause of abuse victims coming forward and seeking justice?
I would sincerely hope not.
Not? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Stuart MacDonald and then James Berry.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, do you ever have cases where reasonable, competent lawyers come to different decisions on whether or not to prosecute a case?
Yes.
Quite regularly?
Sorry?
How do you resolve these? Does it happen often?
It doesn't happen often, no. We do have them.
Yeah.
And it's a case of sitting down and debating, and at some point somebody makes a decision, normally the more senior person.
Okay. And as regards the early investigative advice that was given, that was in no way designed to influence the decision whether or not to interview Lord Brittan?
No, and we made it very clear in the advice. It makes it very clear. It says it's an operational matter for the police.
And finally, this could be the subject of a whole separate inquiry. Interviews of somebody who's been accused of rape could be a fairly significant part of a prosecution from time to time.
No, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, James Berry.
Yes, well, I think what the Met Police want is for your guidance to be, or the guidance in your name, to be changed so that they can refer cases to you where the evidence is on the margin, basically, of the threshold, and also cases where the evidence does not meet the threshold, but the public interest test is met, in their view, nonetheless. And you, I think, disagree with the need for a change.
Well, I think there is a role for the police, which they make decisions in these cases now and do so regularly across the country. So there's no reason for that to be changed. From my own perspective, I think it's important that we, the CPS, deal with those cases that we really should do, and within our existing resources, we're very conscious about what we should be doing. So to open the floodgates and the doors to have more cases coming in where there is no realistic prospect of conviction. So it doesn't matter whether or not the public interest is in pursuing the case. If you don't have the evidence, you can't go ahead with it.
You don't get to stage 2, yeah. And it's right, isn't it, that in our system there are at least 3 levels. We've got the police, and then the CPS, and then the judge if he has to decide whether to put the case to the jury. And it's important that at every stage a decision is taken without fear or favour and independently.
Absolutely.
But there is, of course, an opportunity to pass the buck at every stage, and you wouldn't want to see that happening. You want to see each of those individual actors taking that decision without passing the buck.
Absolutely, and constitutionally that's what should happen.
Precisely.
And for public confidence, I think it's important as well. That
I've got to say, it's not something you're criticised for, because I see that you shouldn't have put a case forward to trial because the trial collapsed, or you should have put the case forward to trial and you didn't. But so it's not a criticism that you normally get. But anyway, finally, just as a senior lawyer, would you agree that it is unhelpful to a court or an inquiry for the allegations that tribunal will be considering to be bandied about in tabloid newspapers prior to the hearing?
Absolutely. If a case is going to court, the court should be the place where the evidence is tested and where it is heard and where an independent tribunal can decide on it.
And you would not expect a Member of Parliament, no less, to put those kind of allegations into a newspaper?
If a case is going to court, it should be heard in court. It doesn't matter who the individuals are. It should be heard in court and tested in court, and the tribunal can then make their decision.
And that includes a public inquiry. Thank you.
Victoria Hopkins.
And just following on from that, Director, and I should declare I have been instructed by the Crown Prosecution Service over the years, the point about achieving best evidence that I mentioned with Mr. Watson, this is a 300-page manual that provides guidance to investigators, social workers, all sorts of parties within the criminal justice system to do exactly as it says, achieve best evidence for victims or complainants of sexual offences. And when people, no matter how well-meaning, when people veer away from that guidance, what sort of repercussions can there be further on down the line?
Well, if we don't have evidence that's obtained through the proper channels, then it may be that the evidence of the witness who's given, if they're giving evidence in court, there's inconsistent statements, or there may be some allegation that, as you said earlier, that they've been coached. And there is an art, particularly in serious sexual cases or involving vulnerable witnesses, to obtaining the best evidence. It can take a long time. It takes training. There's lots of, quite rightly, safeguards there for the individual as well as for the defendant as well.
And I know this is a word that will send a shiver down your spine, but DCI Settle mentioned the word disclosure. And for anyone who's not familiar with the workings of the legal world, there are all sorts of separate legal issues with disclosure of what's called unused material. In other words, material that may be relevant to the investigation but doesn't form part of the trial.
Yes.
And again, this is where as allegations may form part of that disclosure exercise.
Well, anything that undermines the prosecution case or assists the defence, we have a duty to disclose and would do so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Director, thank you very much for coming in. You've been extremely clear in what you've said. We're extremely grateful, and I apologise again for keeping you waiting for so long. Most grateful.
Thank you.
Order. These are very serious matters, obviously, and we've had some very compelling evidence from both the senior ranks of the Metropolitan Police as well as Detective Chief Inspector Settle, and he's used the phrases baseless witch hunt and betrayal in respect of some of the activities and actions that you've been involved in. He's also, on the other hand, said that you've played a very important part in ensuring that individuals were brought to justice. And he talked about the 3 people who have been convicted, who may not have been convicted, had they not come to you and had you not passed things on. I want to limit this to a discussion of process on the allegation by the witness Jane in respect of the late Leon Brittan. And I want to start with one of your quotes, which you may know of. You said that he is as close to evil as any human being could get. That sounded to me and others as being a bit emotional, because you've addressed this whole issue of child abuse very seriously. But this is actually emotion, isn't it? Do you regret using the words about someone, presumably who you've never met, that they are as close to evil as any human being could be?
I do regret using that phrase. Let me just give you clarification on that. That was not a phrase that I used. It was an alleged victim that used that phrase, but that wasn't Jane.
No.
But I do regret using that emotive language. I shouldn't have done, and I am sincerely sorry for repeating it. It was unnecessary.
Because, of course, to the family of Lord Brittan, and indeed, I'm not sure whether this was used when he was alive originally, to him it's not very nice to hear those words.
It wasn't used when he was alive. But yes, I am sincerely sorry for the hurt caused to Lady Brittan for repeating that phrase. I felt at the time that some people's voices were not being heard, but I used the wrong language, and I'm very sorry about that.
Now, we've heard evidence that you are something of a hub in respect of these allegations. People would write to you. You'd made this a big issue after your involvement in the phone hacking issue. You had turned to this issue, people had written to you, you'd raised it in the House of Commons. Do you think, as a Member of Parliament, you actually went a little too far in trying to run the process rather than be the conduit which would enable people to send you information and then you would then pass it on to the police?
No, I wasn't trying to run the process, but nor was I anticipating the volume of information, allegations, alleged survivors and alleged witnesses that would make themselves known to me or my team. I initially asked a question on a very narrow point, and then there was an explosion of information that came into the office that most MPs would think it's their duty to pass it over to the police to investigate.
Because you've used this word a lot, a duty to pass on. I think we all have those situations where we as members of Parliament have a duty to pass on. Yeah. But you seem to have gone beyond that, to the extent where the investigating officer, having told the complainant, Jane, on the 4th of February, then met you and gave you an explanation as to why things were being closed down. That's over and above, is it not, your duty as a Member of Parliament?
When I met DCI Settle on the 10th of February, I wasn't aware of the agenda. I wasn't aware what he was going to share with me when I met him. Indeed, my recollection of the meeting is slightly different to his. He did raise this case, but I didn't understand that was the purpose of the meeting. At this point, I saw DCI Settle's testimony on the monitors. I think I should say that I had a very good working relationship with him, and it is my view that he is a very good police officer, and he led a very good team of investigators who were dedicated to their cause. And I was not aware of the allegations he'd made in front of the committee until he made them.
Of course. But looking at what he has said, and looking at the meeting of the 10th of February, he was very clear that there was no case to answer. You, at that meeting, whether you were surprised at the contents of the meeting or not, didn't raise any issues against that. You subsequently, however, then wrote into the DPP in words that he described, to undermine the investigation that he had taken place, that both you and him had been working on for so long?
Well, that wasn't my intention, and I had no cause to write the letter. When he told me that that was his judgment, I accepted his judgment. It was only when I met Jane for the second time. I first met her in December 2012, and the second time I met her was in late March 2013, where she described the meeting she'd had with DCI Settle, which he himself said was not a pleasant meeting. She felt very distressed and raised a number of concerns about the decision he'd taken.
And you backed her up?
Well, what I did at the time, she was very distressed when she talked to me, was ask her to go away and reflect on what she told me and give it right to me about how she felt and why she felt there was an issue.
Is that really your job? I mean, we've had stories in the newspapers of your office being used as a place for suspects to be interviewed. Is that really your job, Mr. Watson? I mean, you're not Sherlock Holmes, are you?
Well, it's certainly not what I was looking for. I mean, I was asked. I had a meeting with DCI Settle's team in mid to late December 2012. They asked me to come into their office, and one of the things they asked me to do, this was presumably after the Savile affair, was reassure the public that if they came forward, they would be treated seriously by the criminal justice system. They would be believed and their case would be looked at seriously. And that's what happened with Jane. She approached me in December 2012 and made a very brief allegation. I then asked her if she'd reported it to the police. She said she'd reported it to her own police authority, which we now know as South Yorkshire. I reassured her that I think the police would take her views seriously. Fast forward to March 2014, she felt very let down. She'd had to give 2 3-hour interviews with the same testimony. Yes. The first to South Yorkshire, the second to the Metropolitan.
So you still believed her story?
Well, it wasn't for me to believe her or not, to judge her, but I did feel, having reassured her that she would be treated seriously, that I at least owed it to her to test whether the system, the criminal justice system, was doing its job.
And that is why you wrote to the DPP?
That's why I wrote to the DPP.
And the DPP's role in this was very simple, to pass the letter immediately on to the police. And you were then informed that the interview had taken place before the letter had arrived. Is that right?
No, I had no knowledge of any interview of Leon Brittan until I had a phone call from the Independent on Sunday, the day before my letter was revealed in that paper.
And as far as you're concerned, that you worked with the police over a long period of time, that the special relationship that you had was designed to bring these cases forward, and that you don't believe that you have overstepped the mark in trying to run some of these investigations and undermine the investigation, or you don't feel you betrayed DCI Settle, which he believes that you have done?
I feel very sad that DCI Settle feels that, because I had a very good working relationship with him. Neither of us really wanted to be in the position where there was such a volume of information that needed to be passed over to the police. And that wasn't my intention to affect his career. I just wanted to make sure that Jane, at the point that I'd spoken to Jane, I wanted to make sure that her voice was amplified in the system.
And you don't believe that because of your letter there was panic in the Metropolitan Police, that Tom Watson had written in, and if we didn't do what Tom Watson said, it was going to be all over the media?
Well, I'm slightly bewildered by what I've just witnessed on the monitors and in the room. There's obviously a disagreement at the Metropolitan Police on whose judgment was right, but I wasn't aware of any of that at the time. I sent a letter to the DPP. She wrote back to me in June to say she felt that from their point of view procedures had been followed, and she'd passed the letter on back to the Metropolitan Police, and that was the last I heard of it.
Would you like to take this opportunity to apologise to Lady Brittan for some of the comments that you have made? Because I don't know whether you have, but others, of course, have talked about the illness of Lord Brittan, the late Lord Brittan. It must be terrible for the family. What would you like to say to Lady Brittan as a result of what has happened?
Well, I'm very sorry for the distress caused, and I'm very sorry for a wider family. I know they're very angry, and they clearly loved Leon Brittan very much, and they're angry on behalf of their family member, and I am sorry.
But they appear to be angry with you. Do you think you have some responsibility for their distress?
Well, I feel that the people's voices were not being heard, and I felt responsibility for them, and I hope they can try and understand that.
Mr. Burrows.
The Brittan family solicitors have followed up in that issue of apology. They say they found particularly hurtful the impact on their family. Your remarks not long ago, on the 12th of October, on the floor of the House, where you said that there is far more than meets the eye to this case. This was extremely distressing. They also referred to the comments made by you so soon after Lord Brittan's death on Twitter and elsewhere. Do you apologise for those comments?
No, the comments I said on there related to a question I was asked about DCI Settle and the conduct of the case, and it was my view that the accounts that had been reported in the newspapers that I'd effectively forced the Metropolitan Police to change their view on the case was not correct. And so I was saying in an interview where I was put under pressure that I felt that there was more to that particular issue.
Yes, and so are you suggesting, in terms of, if, for example, the late Lord Brittan was here before you today, what would you say to him?
Well, he's not before us today, and I'm sorry about that, but I can't. I mean, you are asking me to comment on things beyond the Jane investigation, and I don't think it would be helpful or appropriate.
In terms of the Jane investigation.
Well, the Jane investigation,
this committee.
I've only, like you, I'm seeing the Jane investigation unfold before the committee. I was not aware of much of this internal debate and disagreement at the Metropolitan Police.
DCI Settle said, he says, I apologise in retrospect if anything I could have done to change it was not called for.
But I'm not responsible. I'm not responsible for the operation of the investigation. I can't be. I don't know about it. What I did was amplify the voice of Jane.
And did you have
order, Lord Prescott? I'm sorry, we're in the middle of a session. We do not want chatting in the gallery. Mr. Watson.
Yes.
Sorry, Jane.
In terms of there's your letter that you sent on the 28th of April. Did you have any other further contact with the Met Police or CPS in relation to the matters pertaining to that letter?
No, I had the letter back from the CPS, and my recollection is that was the last I'd heard of it.
And this particular letter, you don't just make representations, you're quite specific. You refer to the guidance, the actions of the police officer being contrary to ACPO, CPS guidance. You make specific requests for an interview and arrest. What authority do you have to make those particular requests?
I don't. Those were, though I did have cause to read a thing called the ACPO CPS protocol.
Yeah, I've got it all here.
Which Jane had read, and her belief was that in cases like this, in judging participation, consent or an alibi, the police must interview the alleged suspect. And I thought she made a very compelling argument. And so I looked at the document. It's since been updated, but there was a section within it that gave me cause to think, if I wrote to the DPP, it may be that the procedures were not followed. I don't know. It seems to be that that's what senior management at the Metropolitan Police feel, but that's not for me to judge. I was trying to amplify Jane's voice in the system.
I mean, you made reference to it, that you specifically wanted Lord Brittan to be interviewed. You gave your particular opinion on that, rather than just simply giving a voice to someone else. I was trying to make sure, having read the guidelines and having talked to Jane, I wanted to make sure that
they were not treating Lord Brittan differently to any other person. And okay, I might have been forceful with my language in the letter, but my intent was to make sure that the system was working properly.
And you went to the DPP rather than to the boss of the officer in the case. Why was that?
Yes. Well, I just felt the DPP, I may have been wrong to do that, but I felt the DPP would know, would give proper guidance on how to conduct the inquiry.
Thank you, Mr.
And just finally, the officer referred to a baseless witch hunt, inferring, I suppose, your part, because you were involved in wanting the investigations to be continued.
I missed his point on that, but I certainly did not want to take part in baseless witch hunts.
So he said in the decision log, he referred to if the matter went further by way of interview, that it would amount to a baseless witch hunt, which no doubt he's holding you at least partially responsible for.
But I wasn't aware of that he'd written that in his log until an hour ago. And nor was I aware of the judgment that he took and his managers took. I was.
But that's the accusations being made, not least indeed by the original officer in the case. How do you respond to that?
I don't know quite what he meant by that judgment. I mean, I'm not sure if he was saying that he chose not to interview Leon Brittan.
But what's your view on that?
Because he was worried about
how do you
media.
view that judgment that's made, not just by him, that this has been a baseless witch hunt?
Well, I don't know. I'm not party to all the information in this case.
In relation to this allegation, can you give a judgment whether there's the accusation, as far as you're concerned, that you have conducted a baseless witch hunt?
With respect, Mr. Burrows, this is I've only heard what's been said today, and I've not seen the evidence that the police have collected. I don't know what judgment they've made, so it's hard for me to make a judgment about whether DCI settles view that this might form a baseless witch hunt is accurate.
Thank you, David Winnick.
Would you describe yourself, Mr. Watson, as a campaigning Member of Parliament?
I guess all MPs are campaigners, Mr. Winnick, yes.
And the background, before you took up the matters of allegations of sexual abuse and the rest, was on hacking, wasn't it? And you wrote a book about it.
I did.
So when you started campaigning and informing the police of various allegations, you had already, to use an expression, established yourself in the public eye as a campaigning MP, and you wrote a book. What was it called?
Dial-M for Murdoch.
Which some would say was responsible for the closure of the News of the World, apart from anything else. Now, I want to bring you, Mr. Watson, to the climate in which you took up the allegations, in particular Jane. Am I not right? It was a climate where there was a great deal of public concern, parliamentary concern as well, understandably, that historical sexual abuse cases, going back in some instances 40 years and more, Savile, Smith, etc., had not been dealt with in any way whatsoever. These characters, having committed these foul crimes, had died, and there was a sense of injustice that this was continuing. Would that be a right way of describing it?
I think in the media there was that, and in the country people were angry about that. Yes.
And when you say people were angry, what made you in particular decide, after the hacking issue, to more or less take up the same role as a campaigning MP on what I've just said?
Well, I wasn't really looking, believe it or not, to make this a big campaign. It was the sheer volume of information that came through my office that detained a lot more time than I thought. I was actually trying to have a quieter life after the hacking inquiry. But just to give you an idea of the scale, within 6 weeks, since I asked my first question, we had 299 separate contacts. Some of that information, some of those allegations, some of those people claiming to be witnesses or victims. And so it was very difficult to keep up with it. We had to, we had to list it all and send it through to the police, and then they marked up which pieces of information.
Could we confine it to the Lord Brittan issue?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. The three cases which led to a successful prosecution came from you, is it because, and I think this is very relevant, Chair, is it because the people concerned that led to the victims involved contacted you?
No, on the first point of contact was when an individual who'd been a specialist on a previous Metropolitan Police inquiry had approached me to say that he was concerned that a previous inquiry had been closed down prematurely, and that he believed there was intelligence that could lead to further convictions. And that led to the opening of an investigation that led to the conviction of Charles Napier for 13 years. And
thank you. We need to...
Therefore, it would be difficult, would it not, to describe you as some kind of fantasist who out of the blue makes allegations or takes up allegations where there is no foundation at all.
No, I hope that's not the case. I hope people don't say that.
As shown in these three cases, though not in the case of Lord Brittan. Reference has been made publicly to another Member of Parliament who didn't identify Lord Brittan, but on social media Lord Brittan's name was mentioned. Does it surprise you that only you have been called to give evidence and not Lord Goldsmith?
Well, sorry.
Not Lord Goldsmith.
Order. Order, Mr. Winnick. I don't think that we can ask the witness why he was called. This is a decision that was taken by the committee. James Berry.
I asked if he was surprised that he was the witness called and no other member.
Very few things surprise me in Westminster these days, Mr. Winnick. But I'm sure that Zach Goldsmith could give a good account of himself if he were.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. James Berry.
Mr. Watson, just to be clear, there's no criticism of you whatsoever, certainly from me, for referring on allegations of serious and disgraceful sex abuse to the police in confidence. But you published an article, or had an article published in the Daily Mirror on the 24th of January 2015, didn't you? That's right, isn't it?
Yes, I've apologised for that.
Well, you've apologised for one comment in it, but just to be clear, at the point when you published that article, Lord Brittan had not been named by the police, had he?
He had.
Well, I think...
Oh, not by the police, no sorry. His name was in the public domain.
He'd not been named by the police, and indeed the police had not provided any details of the allegation, had they?
No.
No. Did you ask the police for their views before publishing that article in the Daily Mirror?
No, I didn't.
Did you ask Judge Goddard's inquiry team for her views before publishing that information in the Daily Mirror?
No.
It is important, isn't it, that the Goddard inquiry is able to carry out its investigations fairly without witnesses' evidence being contaminated in any way, isn't it?
Well, I sincerely hope the article will not influence the Goddard inquiry, because there are plenty of things with this case that I think that I do need to say to the Goddard inquiry, but I hope that article will not prejudice that.
Well, in publishing that article in the Mirror, you were not promoting the interests of the Goddard inquiry, were you?
Well, nor was I undermining the Goddard inquiry, in my own view.
Well, in publishing those allegations in the Mirror, you were not promoting the interests of the victims if they want a full and fair inquiry before Goddard, were you?
Well, one of the reason I wrote the article, and I've retracted the phrases I used, was there were... it's hard for me to go down this road and stick to Jane.
And I think you should stick to Jane.
It's hard for me to answer that question
Mr. Berry, we must confine our questions to the witness Jane.
Perhaps that could be helpful. When I wrote the article, it bore no relation, nor was there any attributed quotes to Jane.
No, but we're also dealing with the effect on Lord Brittan and his family. And just to put a final question here, you say that you wrote the things that you wrote, for some of which you've now apologised for, because you felt the victims' voices had not been heard. But in fact, the victims' voices were being heard because you'd reported their allegations to the police, hadn't they?
Well, they felt very strongly, or at least one of them did, that they had justice denied. But that is not related to the Jane case, and I'm in a very difficult position when it comes to...
Isn't the fact that the only interests you were in fact promoting there were your own political interests in publishing that article?
No, James, that's not the case at all.
Next, now the ex-head of the elite flying squad, John O'Connor, has said this: the mere fact that he's made it into a political issue and all these people he was making allegations against just happen to be in the opposition party, I find appalling. I can't see any justification for what he's done. Now, they're not my words, they're the ex-head of the flying squads. Now, you are aware that there are disgusting allegations against politicians from what were the three main political parties, yes?
Well, in relation to the wider allegations that aren't Jane, I can assure you that I have reported allegations that link to politicians in all the three main political parties.
But would you accept that by, in public, only pursuing Conservative politicians, you are at least open to the allegation that you're motivated more by politics than by a pursuit of justice? That's
not factually correct, though. I've publicly commented on the conduct of the inquiry in Rotherham. I've commented on, in the early days, although there is now a potential trial on the Jana issue, and there are other public comments I have made. So I don't accept the facts as you put them.
Oh, if that's wrong, I'll check it. And just finally, you've received allegations from a former Labour councillor called Chris Fay, haven't you?
Does it relate to Lord Brittan, the late Lord Brittan?
It has no relation to the Jane case at all.
So I think we'd probably better not put that before you. Dealing with this tribal issue, that you are tribal, and that your campaign on News International was separate from any criticism of the Mirror, who were also involved in hacking, and other organisations that were involved in hacking. You can categorically say to this committee that whatever you get on an all-party basis, you put to the police.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Ms. Ritgani.
Thank you. Mr. Watson, you said that you became an unwitting hub for people who were victims of child abuse or alleged victims of child abuse contacting you, and you wanted a quieter life, you mentioned, which then contradicts. Why do you have a page on your website inviting people to come forward if they have been victims of abuse?
That was related to the early days of the inquiry when, in December 2012, the police themselves asked me to reassure the public and believed that because some of the cases...
So the police needed your help to reassure the public that they can do their job for child abuse victims?
Yes, the police were concerned that in light of Savile and in light of allegations where previous police inquiries had not gone to plan, that public reassurance would help, and that's why that's why I did what I did.
So, as well as being an MP for your constituents, you are now conduit for police, reassuring the public that they can do their job.
Well, as I've explained, I didn't want to find myself in that position, but when you do, you really only have one choice.
Great. I have your website page here, and I've also got the website page for NAPAC, the National Association for People Abused in Childhood, and also the NSPCC's websites, especially their pages where they ask people to contact them, whether it's by telephone or whether it's online, if they feel that they've been victims of abuse. So when you set up your page, were you following any best practice out there in the field that's interpreted by all the major charities that deal with child abuse victims?
Actually, what we did, very early on, it became very clear for my staff that they needed some kind of support and advice on how to deal with very vulnerable potential witnesses and victims. And so we met the national NSPCC very early on and tried to signpost people to the NSPCC. And we also
do that? Because there's no signpost on our website.
And we also took advice from the Metropolitan Police, and I think a detective sergeant came and advised my staff on how they should collect the information and then how best to deal with it afterwards.
There's no link from your website to NAPAC or NSPCC, whereas the other two charitable organisations quite easily signpost people to call or other places for them to go, but yours just seems to go to you. So what do you do with the data?
The
Where do you keep
well, it yields very little information, actually. I'm afraid I've not looked at that page for a long time. But the idea was that when people came forward, we could get them into the system, into support. Either into the criminal justice system if they were making a specific allegation, and reassure them that they would be taken seriously. And as DCI Settle said, in one particular case, that ensured that a successful prosecution happened.
Thank you, Mr. Yes. If it relates to the law, Brittan.
In a little way, in a way, it's about duty of care. My concern is about duty of care. If one person goes to your website, out of going forward to the NSPCC or the other website where they've got processes in place, where they've got response times to email people back, these are vulnerable people that need care and attention. If they're contacting you instead of them, are you failing your duty of care?
One of the things we try to do is people who need help is to get them help as quickly as they can, and the NSPCC became very important in that, both the hotline and the counselling service. But actually, you're taking me beyond this.
But there is not to.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gunn.
Just got two very quick questions.
Concerning the law.
Yes. You mentioned that when you spoke to Jane, that you gave her reassurances that she would be taken seriously.
Yes.
So, what expertise or training do you have to assure victims of abuse that their evidence will be taken seriously?
Well, I had to make a judgment on the competency of the Metropolitan Police team, and actually I judged that they were very serious and very well trained and competent. In the case of Jane, though, she'd made the allegation, I now know, I didn't know at the time, before I'd asked any questions in Parliament. In light of the Savile case, she said that she'd come forward because Alison Levitt had said we can never ignore victims again in light of Savile, and she felt that she should talk to a local police force on that basis. It was then that the alleged crime was supposed to have taken place in London, where the Metropolitan Police took over.
Thank you very much, Stuart MacDonald, and then Victoria Atkins. We do have the DPP next.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. We've heard some evidence that you had a pretty decent working relationship with DCI Settle for a period. Did you have a similar working relationship, just for clarity's sake, with Commander Graham McNulty?
I don't think I've ever met Commander Graham McNulty, although I might have done. I have no recollection of him.
And so you didn't have any working relationship with him in the early part of 2014? No, I don't think I did. Okay. I could check my files to see whether there was any correspondence, but I'm pretty certain there wasn't. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. MacDonald. Victoria Atkins.
Mr. Watson, let's be clear. Everyone here wants to secure justice for the victims of sexual abuse. All right? So in that vein, if someone jeopardised, potentially, the trial of a sex offender, how would you feel?
Well, like everyone else in this room, I would worry that was happening.
Now, you've described it as being a surprise that you had an explosion of complainants contacting you after your statement in PMQs in October 2012. On at least 13 occasions since then, 12 occasions since then, you have referred to, amongst other things, Leon Brittan, you've referred to paedophile networks, you've referred to paedophile ministers and cabinet ministers. Of the 299 allegations you received, how did you choose which ones to publicise?
I didn't publicise. I don't think I publicised any of them. What I did was list them and send them over to the police, who then came back to me on 52 of them and said, can you contact these people? We would like to follow this up. And so my main task in the early days was to talk to those people, to try and convince them that they should talk to the police directly.
Well, we've seen blogs and so on where you have in fact published, I would put, the allegations of these complainants. But I'll deal with Jane. How did XRO website get your private letter to the Director of Public Prosecutions such that they were able to publicise it in May 2014?
They got it from Jane.
From Jane?
Yeah.
All right. And you, in terms of your other allegations, how did you decide which ones should go on your blog and which should not?
In what sense? In what sense?
Well, in your if I can help you, your statement following Lord Brittan's death, you referred to Jane, you referred to other complainants as well. How did you choose them out of the 299 allegations you received just in that 5-week or 6-week period?
In order to answer this question fully, you would draw me away from the Jane allegation.
Well, if you can confine it to the Jane allegation and answer Victoria Atkin's question, why did you choose that one?
The blog post I wrote did not relate to the Jane issue.
It didn't. Okay.
So those were other complainants that you chose, just so I'm clear?
There are other complainants.
And with Jane, why in this particular instance did you choose Jane?
In which instance is this?
Well, you're talking about 299 allegations in the first 6 weeks following your 13 comments that you've made since then. Why? How did you choose which paedophiles, which ministers, etc. to pick?
I didn't choose Jane. Jane chose me.
But you haven't publicised all of the victims that came to you, have you? You can't have done because there are so many of them.
Well, I wouldn't. No.
No. All right.
Thank you.
Just, if I may just follow this through, please. With your experience of campaigning in the world of sexual abuse, you must know that the police do not publicise allegations from complainants before trial. Yes?
Yes.
And did you stop and think for one moment that repeating these allegations in the public arena in the course of an investigation may contaminate or prejudice a future trial?
The allegations against Leon Brittan were not repeated until it was impossible for him to stand trial.
How many times did you meet Jane?
Twice.
And when you comforted Jane and reassured her, did you video that meeting?
No.
No. Did you record the audio of it?
No.
So if in a future trial defence counsel accused you of potentially coaching this very vulnerable complainant, you would have no way of proving otherwise, would you?
Well, the logical conclusion of what you're saying is that I shouldn't have met Jane, or I should have videoed my meeting with Jane.
No, the logical conclusion, Mr. Watson, is that you are a member of Parliament, not a police officer. And as we heard from DCI Settle, police officers who deal with these cases are very highly specialised in their training precisely to achieve best evidence. That's the phrase that is used in the criminal justice system.
Well, all I can say is that I was trying to do my very best on Jane's behalf and trying to help DCI Settle in very difficult circumstances.
Thank you.
And just one final question, please. It follows, given your answer to my first question, that if there has been any impact on future investigations or prosecutions, as DCI Settle referred to, then you yourself must be very worried about the way you've handled some elements of this campaign.
You can only do your best. And as an MP, you can only try and get people into the system and refer their allegations and information to the police, and then it's down for the police to do their job.
So will you learn lessons from this then?
Well, I will be looking very closely at what the conclusions of this committee report are, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Well, we have not decided we're going to have a report, Mr. Watson. In your Huffington Post blog, you state that I did not and could not know if they were true, but I did believe their claims should be fully investigated.
That's right, Mr. Bass. Yes.
Is that also a reference to the Jane meetings? You didn't know what she was saying was true, but you felt they should be fully investigated?
Yes.
So you were not a witness on behalf of Jane. You were someone who was saying, here is someone making a complaint, it needs to be investigated.
That's absolutely right, yes.
Tim Lawton.
Mr. Watson, I think it's fair to say you and I have been at the forefront of the campaign to get child sexual exploitation raised, have its profile raised, that we have encouraged victims to come forward, and we've encouraged the police to take allegations seriously, which have not been taken as seriously as they should have been in the past. And I think we'll all agree that that is a job of a member of Parliament, and it's absolutely right that we should pursue that. What I'm puzzled about is where individual MPs then take it on individual cases and appear to interfere with the due justice process thereafter. So specifically, in your statement when a point of order was raised on the 12th of October, and in specific reference to the Jane case, you said it's not for me to judge the validity of these claims, as the Chairman has just alluded to. But in your letter to the DPP on the 28th of April, that is exactly what you are doing, because you are questioning whether the police have actually pursued these claims, and you are strongly suggesting that the claims have greater validity than the police have decided at that stage that they had. So you were trying to play prosecutor and effectively jury there, were you not?
I certainly wasn't, Tim. What I was trying to do was...
Mr Lawton would be...
Sorry?
Mr.
Lawton, sorry, Mr Vass. Sorry. I was trying to challenge the system to make sure that they were adhering to all procedures.
But you see the point I'm getting at. Nobody is criticising what you've done, what I've done, I hope, in raising this whole situation. But you said you had a very good relationship with DCI Settle.
I did.
And you met him on a number of occasions. You successfully brought information which led to people being prosecuted, which is a good result that we would all applaud. So where did it all go horribly wrong, such that DCI Settle told you quite categorically that in his professional view, as the lead officer on the case, that it didn't even meet the first hurdle of evidential basis to pursue, and now tells us he feels undermined and that you have betrayed him? Where did it go wrong?
Well, I feel it came to the point where the meeting I had with him, actually my recollection was this was a very tiny part of it, and my concern at that meeting was he'd had a family tragedy, and I was concerned for him. I thought no more of his judgment on that until I met Jane at the end of March, when she was very distressed. And in that situation, I could have tried to mediate, or I could have tried to amplify her voice in the system. And I felt that she felt so strongly about it, and then went away and wrote to me that that was the right course of action. I didn't realise that DCI Settle would see it as a betrayal. I understood he would not like it, but I certainly didn't do it with the intention of undermining him.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
I'm very
Lawton.
concerned to see what he said today.
Okay, now I understand that,
case.
but if you were concerned for his condition, family tragedy, and anything else as well, how on earth could it have helped and have been conducive to the good working relationship you'd had in pursuit of perpetrators before, where you don't firstly go back to him to say, look, I'm concerned about this, I want to take it further, or failing that right to another police officer senior to him to say that you think the police should look at this again, but instead go straight to the DPP over the heads of all of them? That doesn't strike me as not wanting to unsettle him in any way.
Well, it certainly wasn't the intention. And actually, it's quite difficult to say this, but until today, I wasn't aware that DCI Settle still worked for the Metropolitan Police. I felt that he had left I understood that he'd left the police. So I'm sorry if maybe I should have called him after knowing that he was still there.
But you see, the point I'm making is to how involved you have been in this case, but in terms of not just expressing concern, passing on information, but trying to micromanage in order to achieve a result that you have set your face.
I do not accept that I was trying to micromanage a police inquiry. What I was trying, at all points, I've just been trying to amplify the voices of the people that have come forward. And
yes, okay, but do you agree, as DCI Settle said as well, and as you know I'm concerned about, that the way this case has panned out will actually undermine the work of the police in properly pursuing potential perpetrators, and undermine the preparedness of victims to come forward in the in the future, and that is not what you or I'm sure, want in the interest
we
of
certainly don't want
historic
that,
cases.
and I hope that isn't the outcome. Indeed, I should say that with all the publicity this week, which I saw your comments on the television on the weekend, it's led to more people coming forward to my office this week, and one of the tasks I have is to make sure that their information is passed to them.
Are they going to be handled in a different way to some of the cases?
Well, that will be down to the police, won't it?
And last question, can I just ask, have you spoken to Justice Goddard and the panel?
Not yet.
On any of these? Why not?
I'm due an appointment. I've got an appointment to see them next month.
Do you not think it should have happened sooner rather than later?
Well, there was a summer
involvement in some
there was a
cases?
summer recess, so but I will be seeing them.
Thank you. One very quick question, specifically related to the Brittan inquiry.
Yes, you said in evidence that you hadn't made public comment in relation to the Jane allegation in blogs or articles. On the 24th of January 2015, in your article in the Mirror, you said, "I've spoken to a woman who said he raped her in 1967.
Okay.
Is that referring to the Jane allegation?
It is, yes.
And that's obviously...
and there was also a published letter that 7 MPs signed.
I'm just talking to you at the moment.
Yeah.
And so that's 3 days after Lord Brittan died. It's 2 days after the police indicated that an investigation into a rape allegation in which a man in his 70s has been questioned was ongoing. And it's before the police then decided, even though he died, whether a prosecution would have been followed. And do you not think that when you're saying at the end of your article to the Mirror on 24th of January, the police must continue their investigations, you're wanting to influence them?
I had a feeling or a belief that it may be that other allegations would not be pursued. And I think I need to leave it there when it comes to this.
Mr. Winnick has one point about them, and then Mrs. Garney.
You started off by expressing apologies over the remarks you made about Lord Brittan, and I, as a Labour colleague, are very pleased that you did so, Mr. Watson. But I want to ask you this. Do you have any regrets on taking up the campaigning issue and seeking what you believe was justice for those who were the victims of sexual abuse? And I'm not referring, of course, to one particular case.
No, I think I did the right thing with the best intentions.
Your conscience is clear.
Yes, and I think there are MPs on all sides of the House that take this matter very seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Winnick. Mrs. Garney.
I think we need to put your conscience to one side, and I want to focus on the victims. I talked about the different charitable organisations that work together to provide support. They don't seem to be linked at all to your website. And you said that Jane was very, very distressed. If she was very, very distressed, what support did you provide her? What professional advice did you seek to make sure that she wasn't distressed further with you going public? I'm worried about these victims or alleged victims becoming victims twice over when you go public.
Well, with Jane, at all points, she's aware of what I've said.
What support? I mean, when I went through the NSPCC guidelines, this is not something they would do. This is not best practice when people come forward when they're victims. They would offer them different types of support, get them in touch with local authority, get them in touch with social workers, they get them in touch with local community activists so they can go to the police station with them. Professionals engaged in this all the time, providing support.
In the case of Jane, I can assure you that she does have support, and I've talked to her family to ensure that that's the case.
Thank you. We'll come to the end of this session now. Mr. Watson, reputational damage when people make allegations that are false is pretty severe, is it not?
It is.
Of the 400 people or 400 separate pieces of information, only 3 people have subsequently been convicted, all 3 with your help. Do you think that this whole process means that more people will come forward and perhaps make false allegations?
Yeah. Just to say, Mr. Vance, the 400 or the 299 in the case of my part of it, that was not 299 allegations against individual people. Right. It was the level of the quality of the information was varying. It was that it wasn't for me to judge what information was useful to the inquiry or not. So in those circumstances, it was the best to give it all to the police and let them come back to us to see whether we could help them with anything else.
You're now the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, you're the Chairman of the Labour Party, you're the Shadow Secretary of State for the Cabinet Office. Will you have the time to continue to do the work that you have been doing on these issues?
Well, I very much hope that we can create the public policy space to make sure that victims of serious sexual crimes feel confident that the criminal justice system will take them seriously.
And at the moment you think that's not happening still?
Well, I think we still have to build confidence. And there is another area that is unrelated directly to the Jane case, but I do think that the counselling services that victims of sexual abuse have available to them are too limited, and particularly psychiatry. And one of the things I feel responsible for doing in the future is to make sure that in the public policy space we can try and make the case, hopefully on a cross-party basis, that there needs to be much greater support for people who suffer child sexual abuse.
Taking Mrs. Garney's point, you're not qualified to do this, and we're not qualified to do this.
No, but
somebody needs to be.
We are in a position to try and make sure the government can ensure it happens.
Indeed. Yeah. Mr. Watson, thank you very much for coming in today. Thank you. Order.